Dosi, an artist with just over 1 million monthly listeners. This is an ambient twist on the lo-fi genre yet again. Lots of pads, that ethereal vibe. This one was so much fun to make. Stick around until the end. I'm not only going to give you some extra tips to enhance the basic elements of this music, but I'm also going to give you an opportunity to get your music heard by thousands of people. Let's dive into it. Let's start with the drums. So Dosi, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, has super boomy drums within their mix. And this time round, I'm throwing my samples into a drum rack so I can compose them in the piano roll. You'll see for why in just a little bit. In this chain, I have Punch, which is my answer to the Knock plugin, so you don't have to spend like 80 quid. You can just head over to the Patreon and download it. I've got EQ8s and a limiter. Really easy kick snare pattern. The BPM of this track is actually 69, but I put it to 138 because I like a double time click. Like I said, I wanted to make this inside the piano roll because I want to show you a really easy way that you can get this swing. Start by putting a hat on every quarter note. Then take your second and fourth quarter notes and change the grid to a triplet grid. That's with Command 3, and then use Command 1 and 2 to change your grid size. What you can do from here is just scooch that hi-hat over slightly until you get the swing feel that you like. When you get the vibe you want, all you're going to do is copy those first 4 hits and then paste them throughout the rest of your piano roll. From here, I had an open hi-hat, which I doubled up with the closed hi-hat, so it has that tick, because the open hi-hat is actually going to be side chained, as we'll see in just a second. And every now and then before the snare, I'm adding this little perk hit as well. As I mentioned, if we come to our open hi-hat, you'll see that we've got a side chain compressor here, and that is linked to my kick drum. Anytime the kick drum plays with that open hi-hat, it's just ducked ever so slightly so we don't get all of the sound of the open hi-hat together. Every now and then I'll introduce some send effects as well. Here we've got the delay at the end of bar 10. So that's just a little filtered delay that I've put on send B, and I've chosen my own time in there so it's not to the grid. At the very end of the loop, I'm also using the returns inside the drum rack to send a reverb one shot as well. So all you need to do is make sure that a reverb you like is inside the return chain list. Here I have Valhalla Vintage Verb. And upon the snare, I'm just going to automate some of that reverb in at the last hit of the snare. Now we spoke about textures. I also assigned some texture to the snare that rolls in and rolls out. I've got a few textural kind of chain sounds here, some Foley. And I'm just coupling that with the downbeats of the snare. EQ8. Little glue compression and a line delay to make it wider. Nice and simple, but just adds a little graveliness, as does the stream sample that's sitting in the bottom of the mix. This is also side chained just a little bit to the kick too. Finally, for some added sparkle, I have some cymbals and chime hits as well. These are all acoustic sounds. That means that all my perk together sounds like this. Before we get to all of our ambient stuff, let's just focus on some chords. I'm starting off with the G flat minor. We're heading over to the E major. We've got a D here, and then ending on the E major once again with that added B at the top. For the chords, I'm using the claustrophobic piano. I think this has long been discontinued, but if you're a member of the Patreon, I actually have a very similar piano on the way, so don't go anywhere. And I coupled that with a piano underneath, which I also have in an instrument rack. The reason for this is I can keep the decent sampler on the top, which has kind of a darker tone. And I'm also adding the basic E piano underneath with some EQ and some Valhalla to give it more of like kind of a plucky transient. That will help pull it out the mix alongside all of our other elements. Once I was happy with the chords and the drums, it was time to get some guitar in there. And I noticed that there was 2 types of guitar. We had kind of a lead guitar sound and a rhythm sound with Dosi's music. So let's check out the rhythm first. So no surprise, I'm using Ample Sound semi-hollow guitar on the fingerstyle preset, and I'm just using strummer mode to choose the F sharp, A major, D major, and E major chords. This is going to complement my other chords quite nicely, but I'm turning off all the effects inside Ample Sound's guitar, but that's because I want to use some of the effects in Neural DSP's Corey Wong archetype. So I'm using the compressor and the reverb and delay of this preset to take us from here to this. Some of these effects are going to come into play a little bit later with our pad sounds too. After a little bit of EQ, I wanted to duplicate that guitar, Ample Sound and the Corey Wong archetype once again, but with a little bit more reverb this time. We're going to sidechain the lead guitar to the kick, a little bit of vibrato to give it that lo-fi detuned effect, EQ 8, and then a glue compressor at the end. Let's bring it in with the other elements too. Oh, I often talk about how easy it is to get your music on streaming platforms. There's a link in the description to get a discount off your first year with DistroKid. This week, let's talk about how easy it is to protect your music. Some of my producer friends get word that their music is being stolen or uploaded to other platforms without their permission. DistroLock puts an end to that. I'd use it in conjunction with their Page Defender, but I'll probably talk about that in another episode. DistroLock is everything you need to protect your music. Simple, but super helpful stuff, guys. And don't forget, if your music is on Spotify, stick around until the end of the episode where we're going to boost your play count as well. Let's get back to the episode. So of course, to help out with that fullness, we want to add our bass. I'm using a very simple sine-like bass preset. Got 15 milliseconds of attack, so there's no clicks there, and a little bit of decay. I'm basically just using the root notes of those chords that we had from the piano, and my punch plugin, which you can find at the Patreon. I think it's free, just to give it a little bit of low-end saturation. All right, so we're filling up the low end now, but we still want that ambient fullness in that middle space. So we're going to start off with an overarching folder, which you'll populate with an electronic pad. I'm just using a drift preset and then a vocal pad, which we'll come to. In the group, we're probably going to want to EQ those instruments together, and we're going to add a sidechain compressor, which is linked to our kick as we've seen before as well. And once again, we're just using the notes from our piano chords. It's that we're taking out 2 of the lowest notes. We're also making sure that we automate the cutoff, so the pad grows darker and brighter and kind of evolves with its movement. We'll be doing a similar interesting thing with the vocal pad as well. So you can see that I'm using Granulator 2, or if you're opening this project in Live 12, maybe it's Granulator 3. I basically took a vocal sample or a selection of vocal samples and made sure that they worked with our chord progression. I'm then manipulating that group of vocal samples by adding reverbs, delays, and I'm also making sure that some of those vocals play forward and some of those vocals play in reverse. Once I'm happy with that, resample it and drag that one sample into Granulator 2. You can see by the steps of the file position, I can make sure I cycle through my sample with the changes of the chords. But you can see by this ever so slight evolution as well, I can cycle through that sample to give it a little bit of manipulation with each chord change. And you can probably see here on the right, I'm also making sure that I automate the high pass filter of the EQ as well. So once again, those chords grow brighter or darker with each chord change. Let's add in our electronic pad. That's so gorgeous, right? And that's basically our entire loop, but I want to give you an extra couple of tips that I noticed in Dosi's production, and is really just the marks of a producer that really knows their stuff. It should take your production game to the next level. So underneath this, you might want to add an acoustic instrument. Here I've selected Opus, which just has a really nice sample library. I've chosen the Zonghu, which is a Chinese bowed string instrument, and I'm just playing one bowed note with each chord change. The CPU spikes when I use this instrument are crazy, so I've frozen and flattened those samples in place, and I've just chosen a few of those resampled elements to put on the track below, making sure that I increase the mix wash at the end of each note. Let's put that in context with some of the pads. It's really low in the mix, but I feel like fading in the audio and fading it out gives me better control of that resampled loop. And at this point in the mix, you can see that I don't have that bowed string instrument, but I have this chord progression. It's actually going to become kind of a bubbly synth pad. If you remember earlier in the mix, I kind of had this roll on the ride cymbal and took out the kick for a moment. And I noticed in Dosi's track Void, when he did this, he also met it with a kind of rising synth sound. So I've made sure that I've got this really simple operator pluck, and I've added the arpeggiator to it, and I'm just automating in the volume. Super simple stuff, and it's going to come into play when we have that rolled ride fill. But I promised you we'd be using these Corey Wong effects one more time, and I'm just using the wash pedal, with the dry wet being the thing that we also automate through the mix. So it starts at about 30% and then increases to 100%, and it gives us this lovely pitch shimmer. It's the only time we hear this, and let me bring it in with our other melodic elements. It's just something to lift the mix at that very moment. And then right at the end, for just an added kind of analog texture, you want to add your vinyl sample, your noise, or go for something like rain, which is what I've used. I'm making sure that I use the vocoder to just add that kind of hiss emphasis, and that's basically your track. So there we have it, gang. Dosi. What do you think about this episode? What do you want to see in future videos? Have your say in the valleys below. And as always, head over to the Patreon if you want to grab this project in both Live 11 or Live 12. Now, for the exciting stuff. You probably already know of our awesome Lo-Fi Focus playlist with thousands of followers. It's always been free to submit your music, and many artists say it's been super helpful in getting their music heard. So as a thank you for watching this video till the very end, I want to give you a special offer. So if you share this video, whether it be a screenshot or screen record, whatever you like, and tag me in it anytime this week, this is the week that the video went live, I'll drop you a DM. Just reply with your lo-fi or ambient song link on Spotify, and I'll put you at the top of our Lo-Fi Focus playlist. The idea is to get your music some more streams. I'm trying to help as many members of the community as possible. Thank you, as always, for watching this far, and I'll catch you next time.